Hello everybody, it's Noah Farrow, your favorite bipolar actor, and today we are getting into a little Twilight Zone. It's a Twilight Zone that has been banned. So I'm interested because I didn't know there was one that was banned.
Twilight Zone combined sci-fi, fantasy, and horror into a televised anthology that ran for 5 seasons on CBS. Each standalone episode featured characters suddenly thrust into the Twilight Zone, where they encountered unusual and often supernatural events and situations. In just a moment, we'll uncover which episodes were the scariest and why the show was canceled. We'll also discuss one particular episode that was so controversial it wasn't broadcast again until over 5 decades. The signpost for our next stop is ahead, but before we begin, please hit that thumbs up icon to show support. And subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. But now it's time to travel through a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. Submitted for your approval. The Twilight Zone premiered on October 2nd, 1959, to rave reviews, but it did not deliver the ratings CBS hoped for.
That seems to be the case with all the Twilight Zones, all the iterations of them. They come back and 2, 3, 4 seasons and poof, it's gone. It doesn't hit. It's like a niche pocket of us. Got to keep it alive.
As we'll soon see, CBS executives had a very itchy trigger finger and almost pulled the plug 3 times. But the show survived a brief hiatus and surpassed its competition by the end of the first season. Rod gets the gig. Rod Serling grew up in upstate New York and served as a paratrooper in World War II. Private Serling was injured in a battle during the liberation of the Philippines and received a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. He said he was bitter about everything and at loose ends after the war and began writing to, quote, get things off his chest.
Okay, this explains a lot. If you have listened to a lot of the audio or seen the episodes, there are a lot of, other than it was Sign of the Time, there are a lot of war episodes, and they seem to be extremely deep episodes when he gets involved in telling stories about the war.
As he recovered from his injuries.
The journey into the shadows that we are about to watch could be our journey.
The pilot episode, Where Is Everybody?, was narrated by Westbrook Van Voris, who was unavailable for future episodes due to scheduling conflicts. Orson Welles was contacted as a possible replacement, but he demanded too much money. Rod Serling then became interested in Richard Egan and said, quote, it's Richard Egan or no one. It's Richard Egan or I'll do the thing myself.
What you're about to see, gentlemen, is a series called
Do It Live!
The rest, as they say, is Twilight history. What's the scariest episode of The Twilight Zone? With 156 episodes to choose from, picking the scariest one is quite tricky. We're not bold enough to try, but several adventurous bloggers have taken on this audacious challenge, and we want to read your picks in the comments too. Ricky Ruzin from Collider chose Night Call, featuring Gladys Cooper as Mrs. Keene, an older woman terrorized over the telephone by a voice from the grave. Screen Rant's Anthony Fertino picked Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, starring a pre-Star Trek William Shatner. He's the only one on his flight who can see a monster on the wing, sabotaging...
Which is the premise for one of this Twilight... You know what? I've never watched the entire Twilight Zone movie, but I know one of the episodes was 20,000 Feet. Or it was an anthology. So I think it might even been called 20,000 Feet. It was a little different. And The Simpsons did a top tier.
The engine. Nightmare was also good enough for second place on MovieWeb's rankings. Their #1 selection was And When the Sky Was Opened, an episode featuring an astronaut searching in vain for a fellow crewman who suddenly disappears after an ill-fated voyage. Of the 92 episodes Rod Serling wrote, his personal favorite was Time Enough at Last, starring Burgess Meredith. Meredith played a bookworm who survives a nuclear apocalypse. He walks up the public library steps and soon enters the Twilight Zone. Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
You see this? It holds a promise for anyone who smokes. It's Oasis.
Rod Serling smoked up to 5 packs a day, and he was the on-screen spokesman for Chesterfield
And I'm sure it
Cigarettes,
killed him.
one of the show's sponsors. The American Tobacco Company also became a sponsor in later seasons, and insisted he always be seen on camera with a cigarette. In 1975, Serling began experiencing sudden chest pains while mowing his lawn. He was rushed to the hospital by his next-door neighbor, and a few weeks later, he had a second heart attack. They scheduled an open-heart surgery at the Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester. Unfortunately, Rod had a third heart attack during that procedure and passed away 2 days later at the age of 50.
Oh!
The great Rod Serling was buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Seneca County, New York.
Okay, was unaware that the brother was 50. People didn't age that well back then. So I thought he was about 60? 50? That's amazing. Don't smoke, kids.
York. And his good friend, Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, read his eulogy. A new sheriff in town. Jim Aubrey took over as the CBS studio head in 1959, and his formula was characterized as broads, bosoms, and fun. So yeah, Aubrey did not like The Twilight Zone, which struggled to find sponsors, frequently went over budget, and wasn't nearly as successful as shows like The Beverly Hillbillies and Gilligan's Island. So Aubrey ordered 7 fewer episodes for season 2 as a cost-cutting measure, and made the extremely unpopular decision to shoot 6 episodes on videotape. Why was The Twilight Zone canceled?
Something's not right. Something's not right.
Rod Serling often worked more than 90 hours a week and began getting severely burned out by the 3rd season. He said, quote, "I was writing so much, I felt I had begun to lose my perspective on what was good and bad." A Variety reviewer even accused the show of feeding off itself when the show had 0 sponsors lined up for the 4th season.
That's actually a lot like, so Tyler Perry is a example of that, and what people criticize him of. It's because he writes everything, and he has so much content. He's got to be writing all the time. And people think that he might have lost perspective. It's actually very much the same way, but he sees it in himself. And Tyler is still successful, and it hasn't burned him out, so maybe he's just like, carry on.
It was replaced in the lineup with the sitcom Fair Exchange. But when Fair Exchange wasn't renewed, Twilight Zone returned as its mid-season replacement. The show had to be expanded to an hour to fill the time slot. But Serling complained that making the show longer would make the show more like a soap opera. So the Twilight Zone returned to the half-hour format for the show's 5th and final season, but continued to produce some of the show.
I think that's wrong. And I think in hindsight, we see that it wouldn't be a soap opera. I mean, I guess it's how he writes it. Might be a soap opera, but an hour-long Twilight Zone definitely would work.
Those most memorable episodes. Unfortunately, ratings were still lukewarm, and Aubrey canceled the show once and for all. Serling was reportedly too frustrated and tired to keep fighting for the show, and sold his rights to CBS. ABC offered him a deal to develop a new horror-themed series called Witches, Warlocks, and Werewolves. But Serling passed and remarked, quote, "I don't mind my show being supernatural, but I don't want to be booked into a graveyard every week." Serling eventually wound up at NBC as the creator and host of Night Gallery, but he didn't have nearly as much creative control as he had become accustomed to. What episodes of Twilight Zone were banned? So 5 episodes were not included in the original Twilight Zone syndication package.
What do you need?
Sounds and Silence, Miniature, and A Short Drink from a Certain...
I wonder if there are, 1, 2, 3. There are 3 actors from Star Trek that made, I think there are 3. It might be a little bit more, but I think there's only 3 actors, William Shatner, and that have bones, and
oh my.
Hello. That made an appearance in Twilight Zone episodes. Also, Gene Roddenberry, Rod Serling, best friends, Gene Roddenberry, peels off and has 3. So I'm wondering if there is a correlation. I don't know how people got cast in or got their opportunities with Star Trek, but I wonder if there's a symmetry, a seam.
Oh my.
Fountain were still involved in copyright infringement lawsuits and couldn't be released until the lawsuits were settled. An occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge was a French short film broadcast only once as a special episode, after it won Best Short Film Subject at the 1962 Cannes Film Festival. But The Encounter created so much controversy after its first showing that CBS didn't dare release it into syndication. So let's encounter The Encounter. The Encounter was one of Twilight Zone's only 4 bottle episodes, taking place in a single location and featuring only 2 actors. Neville Brand plays a World War II veteran named Fenton who discovers a samurai sword while cleaning his attic.
Oh, wow.
A pre-Star Trek, George Takei plays a
Takei,
young
love him.
Japanese-American boy named Arthur who wanders in looking for work. Fenton invites Arthur to join him for a beer and learns that Arthur was 4 years old during the 1941 Pearl Harbor attack and spent part of his childhood in an internment camp. Takei was the same age as his character and also personally spent time in an internment camp. Tension builds as the 2 men talk, particularly when we learn that he killed a Japanese soldier and took the sword as a trophy. We also discover that Arthur's real name is Taro, and his father was a spy who helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack. Rod Serling chose the science fiction genre so he could tackle controversial issues without alienating censors and sponsors. When The Encounter aired in 1964, the United States government was only beginning to acknowledge.
Like I said earlier, it seems like the war episodes are the most powerful, which, I mean, if you were in the war, and you're writing all these episodes, that is definitely going to be in your heart. So, yeah, this makes so much sense now listening to this and why the war episodes or things that deal with the war, powerful.
Its crimes against Japanese Americans during the Second World War. The subsequent backlash from viewers and critics was so strong that The Encounter was withheld from syndication, only available on home video. But in 2016, Sci-Fi decided enough time had passed.
You think?
And they included the episode in the New Year's Eve Twilight Zone marathon. 6 years later, Neville Brand played Lieutenant Kaminsky in the Pearl Harbor film Tora Tora Tora. Takei's childhood experiences at the internment camps also inspired the musical Allegiance, which premiered in 2012 in San Diego and ran on Broadway from October 2015 to February 2016. Was the Twilight Zone movie cursed? 4 classic Twilight Zone episodes were adapted into a film anthology in 1983.
So that answers my question. My question was, were they taken from original Twilight Zone episodes? Because I knew 20,000 Feet was adapted. So, okay. I'm going to have to watch that.
Tragic on-set accident claimed the lives of 3 actors. It also started an urban legend that the film was cursed. On the final day of filming, Vic Morrow was playing a soldier in the Vietnam War, rescuing 2 children from the advancing army. But a pyrotechnics explosion occurred too close to an approaching helicopter, and the entire crew was forced to witness the crash. Morrow and actor Micah Din Lee were instantly decapitated, and Renee Shin-Yi Chin was crushed under the wreckage. Both Warner Brothers and director John Landis were sued for negligence, and the subsequent criminal litigation lasted for over a decade.
Fun fact, John Landis' career got back on track when Eddie Murphy called for him to direct Beverly Hills Cop 2. He also directed Coming to America. He also got in a fight with Eddie Murphy. Got punched in the face.
During the proceedings, it was discovered that Landis violated child labor laws and ignored numerous health and safety precautions. Landis and 4 other defendants were tried and acquitted of manslaughter. The incident definitely cursed Landis's longtime friendship with co-director Steven Spielberg, and it also led to new safety protocols and regulations throughout the motion picture industry. The Twilight Zone has won 2 Primetime Emmys and has developed a loyal following in syndication. The series revolutionized episodic television and was rebooted in 1985, 2002, and most...
Let's have a conversation about 1985. Oh, I was too young to be watching that. Wait, now I'm doing the math. I was way too young to be watching that, but I sure was. When I say too young, I'm talking about I'm barely in school. Why am I watching Twilight Zone 1985?
Most recently, in 2019, the Writers Guild of America ranked it as the third best written TV series ever, and it was ranked number 7 on Rolling Stone's list of the 100 greatest shows of all time. It also inspired a popular thrill ride for people who want to leave the happiest place on Earth and enter the Twilight Zone. Whew, now that we're back from the 5th dimension, it's time to hear from you all. What were your
William
personal
Shatner.
favorite Twilight Zone episodes?
Bill.
Has anyone out there seen The Encounter? And was the movie or any of the revivals worth watching? I did hear some good things about the 2019 revival, so get in the comments and tell us all things Twilight.
Cool, I didn't really know what I was getting into and learned so much about the Twilight Zone. I have so many Twilight Zone posts, as you guys know. I just ran across that randomly and thought, I don't really know any backstory of the Twilight Zone. I'm just really obsessed with it as a whole. I love anthology, by the way. Yeah, I'm a sucker for any anthology platform. So, they get me. You get me, man. You get me. Anyway, I would like you to join me again as I do this later. I have more of this. I have more reactions. Go ahead, take a look at them. Like and subscribe.